In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate the hypertext transfer protocol requests. In other words, we'll take a look at how we use Python to access the internet. There are several libraries out there that we can use. Certain are built in, certain that we can use from the internet. But here the objective is to take a look at various requests that we can make and use Python code to access information from the internet. Now, typically it's used in the web scraping industry where you want to scrape data on the internet, but that's not the point. We need to focus primarily on the ability of Python to access the internet. So when we're writing code for our own selves or for a project that you're working on, you like to be able to use this particular code so that it helps your project. Okay, all right, so let's jump right in. And first, let me begin by showing you the import URL library request. And I'm going to just put a comment here and say import request. Let me go ahead and save this file. So navigate to our data folder, documents, data files, and we have our Python folder somewhere. Here it is. And I'm going to call it import internet.py. Great. Right after the comment, we import our URL lib.request. And next I'm going to say from URL lib.request import open. In fact, it's URL open. And then get my variable in here, f equals URL lib.request.open. And of course I need to specify what it is that I would like Python go ahead and open. So I can just type, let's say, URL address, http:// and just use python.org, for instance. Okay. And then of course I need to be able to print the results, and I'm going to tell it to read and see what happens. So let's save it, run it, and after a short while Python displays the output, goes out there onto this site called python.org and gets everything that this site has. Okay, so all the content basically is now within the output window of your editor. So this way you can actually bring in the entire source code. So if I were to go to, let's say, python.org, let me copy this, and if I were to get on the internet here and simply go to this URL, python.org, and do a Control-U, notice I'll be able to view the source of this page. And this entire page contains the source code for python.org. And this is exactly what I asked Python to do, is go to this site and I'll be able to read and find out whatever is on this particular page. So this is one way you can make the request to bring in everything from python.org. If I need a different site, I can simply change the address. So I can say something like claydesk.com, run it, and it will bring in all the data from this particular site. So here's all the information. Similarly, you can use any other site you like. If I need to check the status of, let's say, a certain site, whether it's okay or not, I can use the client library. For instance, let me comment this code out. In fact, see this code. And here, I'm going to put another comment. Just check status. And I'm going to go ahead and import http.client. And from this http.client, I'm going to import https connection. And then my connection equals, or con equals, http.client.connection HTTPS connection, and then of course my site goes in here. So it's python.org one more time, and then I can say connection request would be using the get method that I'm going to use the backslash. So variable r1 here equals connection dot response, and then finally print. I want to be able to see the status, so r1 dot status, and r1 would be the reason as well. Great. So let me save it, run this code, and you should be able to get the status okay. But we'll take a look at the object has no attribute called response, and line 12, and this is correct because instead of con I need con.get response, right? Otherwise it doesn't know what to do. All right, save it, run it, and this time the response from python.org, it'll be 200 and okay. So this is another way you can check to see the http.client. Now we can continue on and work with cookies, right? So let me demonstrate how we can work with cookie and setting cookies. And cookies is just a small piece of code that, for example, when you get to a site, the site remembers the next time you visit, right? So we can define those in Python as well. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on with this. Instead of commenting this code out, I'm going to leave it as is and just say from HTTP import cookies, and then define C equals cookies dot simple cookie. Here we go, and then get my list in there. So it'll be C, let's say fig equals, I'm going to say Newton, and then I'm going to set another one, and this one is going to be sugar, and this would equal cone. Great. Print it out, print C, save it and run it, and notice the output would be, well, 200 OK comes from the top code here, but this particular code says set cookie is fig equals Newton and sugar equals cone. So another way you can set your cookies in Python. Let me go ahead and next move to the URL lib request one more time. Just a simple request, and I've demonstrated this in the first part here, which is commented out, is where you can read the site. Now once you read the site, you want to be able to know more, right? You want to be able to, let's say, parse data from the site. So let's demonstrate that part. Let me scroll down, in fact, and start with the import URL lib dot request, and then import URL lib dot parse. Specify my URL, which is my target URL. So this is going to be, let's say, HTTP : and I'm going to use any URL here, cletus.com, and the values that I'm looking for goes in my curly braces, and it's the S, for example, basic, and then I'm going to have the submit, and then search. Make sure my indentation is correct. So once I have specified the values, I'm going to go ahead and define the data. So data is going to be URL lib dot parse, and I'm going to use the URL encode these values. Next, define my data equals data dot encode, and the format that I wish to encode is the -8, which is standard. And the reason why is because, let me put a comment here, data should be in bytes. And my response, or before my response, I'm going to also request req url lib dot request and the URL and the data also. Then my response that I'm looking for is going to be url lib dot request dot URL open and then my req. And finally, the response data would equal response.read, and finally print the response data. So RESP and data. Great. So this way we can take a look at the output. If I save it, run it, Python is going to set, of course, first the cookies and then get me all the data parsed based on my request. So Python is very powerful in working with the internet. So you can use these libraries, for instance, and set cookies, or you can bring in any data that you wish to evaluate or use. Now, certain sites do block this, by the way, just so you know. For example, if you wish to go to google.com, it's not going to let it happen because they want to be able to provide their own APIs if you would like to integrate their data or programs within your own project. So just so you know that not all sites you'll be able to get access to. You'll probably get access forbidden and so on. So practice working with the Python URL libraries and methods that I've shown you, and let's move to the next lesson.